Thank you very much, Guy. Thank you to all our panelists. That was the final panel discussion of the day, and we actually now have our final session of the day. And for that, I'd like to invite to join me on stage Hugh Jones, the Managing Director of Business Services for the Carbon Trust. And we're going to have a Carbon Trust Insight session. So Hugh, if you'd like to join me, we get to sit down as well.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody.
So maybe I could begin, Hugh, by saying thank you. And we've had a great day of sessions today, some amazing speakers, some great insights. What for you would be some of the standout themes of the day?
Well, I think for me, there have been two main themes today, Sasha. The first one I would say is togetherness. And the second one is very much the need for a scientific, fact-based approach to solving this problem.
Okay, so let's go into both of those in a little bit more detail. Sure. Togetherness, what do you mean by that?
Well, there's a quote that I wrote down, actually. It was Marcia at UNGC who said, this is no longer the interest of the few, but the imperative of the many. And I thought that was a good sort of rallying cry.
Struck a chord with a lot of people, that quote, yeah.
Good. And I think we heard from, for example, from Baroness Brown about the intersection between business, government and finance, and a lot of other speakers talked about, particularly in the afternoon session, about the need to work along supply chains. There was talk, particularly from Tetra Pak, about communicating with consumers. So all of these different stakeholders were sort of brought into play. But I think it went beyond that, and I think it went quite far beyond just climate change, carbon. We had a lot about biodiversity, and rightly so. And of course, we had a lot about societal fairness, livelihoods, the just society, just transition. So all of that sort of came in, and that, for me, that was a big theme of the day.
Absolutely. And what was your second theme?
The second one was, well, I said science and fact-based. And I think we do have to remember that this is a technical area, and it's really hard to solve, and we're not going to be able to solve it without understanding the impacts that all of the things that we do have on, particularly on climate change and on the broader environment, and indeed on society. And those impacts are a matter sometimes of shining a light. I mean, that's one of the reasons we at Carbon Trust get very involved in footprinting, because that can demonstrate why a certain type of part of the food system and the packaging system needs to change, and another part is actually quite benign. And until you do that analysis, people do not know all the facts. So I think a science-based approach is essential, and that also applies to the solutions. We heard a lot about technology, some really exciting acronyms I've barely heard of, like AIoT, and of course 5G, and also perhaps more better known low-carbon cement, and then a lot of other references to technical solutions. Each of those solutions, the science needs to be fully understood, optimized, and implemented in the right way.
And also as a justification, I suppose, for businesses to make those changes that they need to make.
Absolutely, yes. Yes, indeed.
We ran a series of polls today, didn't we, Hugh?
Yeah.
And we had some quite interesting findings. Should we run through those?
Let's do that.
Yeah. Can we bring up the first poll that we ran? I think the question was yes. Oh, yeah. Do you think your board fully understands the risk climate change presents for your business? Are you surprised by that?
3.7 out of 5. Well, at first sight, that looks like quite a sort of a middle of the road answer, but I think it is interesting that people are prepared to say that their own boards don't fully understand this issue. And actually, I think that's really encouraging, because it says to me that people are very much alive to the need for boards to understand this. We heard in the Green Finance Roundtable quite a bit about the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, and how it's, for example, in the UK, is likely to become mandatory by 2022. But I think this goes further than that. This is about sustainability being at the heart of all important decisions that companies make.
Would you have expected that figure to be higher?
No, because I think at Carbon Trust, we work with quite a lot of boards, and we're doing a lot of engagement of non-exec directors, and they're great. But you can see that for a lot of people, this is still quite a new issue in the depth that it needs to be gone into. And I've got another quote, actually. Mark Evans, the CEO of Telefonica O2, he said, "This isn't a fringe show anymore. It's got to be mainstream." And I think to me that sums up what businesses have to do to be future fit for 2050 this has to be at the forefront of all their thinking.
And do you think with the pause and the reset that we're all allowed to do right now because of COVID, do you expect to see that change when you meet with businesses, when you meet with organizations?
We're already seeing it changing. So the level of both of knowledge and of focus on this area at board level has increased immensely just in the last 18 months, so since before COVID.
That's interesting. Excellent. We had a second poll question, if we could bring that up, please. Does the proliferation of target-related terms, net zero, carbon neutral, carbon positive, etc., help or hinder your job as a sustainability professional?
So I think this one requires a bit of interpretation. So we can see that I can't quite see the number, but it looks like about 60%, 62%, I think it is, said that it helps them as a sustainability professional. And then the remainder was sort of split between makes no difference and hinders. The way I would interpret that is that as somebody in an organization, in a business, there are plenty of options for things to do, for strategies, whether those are net zero, carbon neutral, carbon positive, as you said. That's certainly how I would interpret that. I would sound a note of caution, though, and that is that it's really important that we are clear about what those terms mean. And we would say at Carbon Trust that net zero now, and we've heard a lot about net zero today, net zero really has to underpin everything. That has to be the organizing theme for what not just businesses, but governments and society as a whole need to do. And that's not easy. You know, the science says that to have even a 66% chance, a 2/3 chance of sticking to 1.5 degrees as a pathway, about 90% of emissions have to go by 2050. And not only that, but the remainder have to be compensated with or neutralized with actual greenhouse gas removals. So this is a really tough ask. And it's really important that everybody focuses on that trajectory. Carbon neutral is a really valuable approach, particularly in the present day, and it can sit alongside net zero. So carbon neutral is all about taking and reducing the emissions of a product or an organization or an event or of history. We heard about historic carbon neutrality today as well, and of using good quality offsets to compensate for those in addition to a net zero strategy. And we think it's really, really important that everybody understands that.
We've also heard a lot of talk about, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. Is that widely understood, do you think, or is that now starting to be talked about a lot more?
Well, they always say know your audience, and I know that there are at least 600 people who have been tuning in today, and I don't know them all, but in general, the people who engage with us are very well informed, and those who are in the, if you like, sustainability professionals, they're pretty well versed in the GHG protocol scopes. Obviously, for a lot of other people, it's quite a new idea. But I think the important thing is that everybody understands that it's not just what happens within the walls and gates and offices of a company. It's what happens upstream and downstream, the value chain of everything that they produce.
Consumers, because as consumers, we're not thinking about it in that same way.
Indeed, and as we saw from some of the research, and we've done our own research, which Tom DeLay mentioned at the start of the day, consumers are increasingly interested in making decisions based on the sustainability of a product or service, and as we've discussed, there is a big increase in the wish of organisations to communicate through endorsement, to label or otherwise talk about their achievements in reducing the impact of products.
Absolutely. Let's move to the third poll. Yes. Over the coming year, which of these audiences are the most important for your sustainability communications? So can you see that?
Yes. If there was a fence, I would say that everyone is sitting on that, because those 5 constituencies.
That was a tough question there. That was a tough one.
Those 5 constituencies of shareholders, employees, business customers, consumers, and supply chain partners, it's pretty much 20% each. What I would say is I'm sure that everybody had to rank them. So clearly there are lots of different answers there. And I think it just represents the diversity of the audience, over 600 people. How you prioritize those depends, I think, partly on what kind of company, business you're in, sometimes what your role is within that business, and also the timing of the question. I think there are times when each of those would be a priority for a lot of people.
So let me put you on the spot, Hugh. You know I was going to do this. If you had to pick one of those, which was the most important?
Well, I'm going to say it depends what time you ask me that question. And they are at different times all equally important.
Okay, so a tough one to answer. Thanks for not answering that. Okay. Well, actually, before we move on, there were some questions that came up this morning when Tom was speaking, and I thought maybe I could put one of those to you. It got a lot of upvotes, and it was, does the Carbon Trust have resources available for companies and organisations to develop net zero pathways? And if so, how can you access them?
Right, yeah, well, we do. And we talked a lot about sharing best practice, so we're very happy to do that. The team have delivered over 75 science-based targets for projects, if you like, for organizations around the world. And a science-based target, a science-based trajectory underpins any net zero target. So most of the expertise that we have is grounded in a lot of great sort of history with clients. I would say that we can make things available, and we do. There's, for example, an excellent webinar which is on our website. It's also on the platform today. And I understand the platform is going to stay open for, I think, until the end of this week. There's a whole set of presentations, including Net Zero webinar on there. So I'd urge people who are interested to have a look at that. But ultimately, everybody's net zero is different. So it has to be quite strongly customized to the growth path, to the conditions, to the optionality, if you like, of each company. So ultimately, you will need to speak to an expert. And there are ways, if you want to speak to our team, there are ways through the platform or just through the website to go either for a call or a net chat or another way of sort of finding out more. So absolutely, the materials are there, but also the people, I think, even more importantly.
So please do get in touch if you want to find out anything more. Okay, great. And just finally, Hugh, what would be maybe your closing thought for the day?
Okay, so I think just developing the idea of togetherness, and it actually did come out in the session that Guy ran just now. I think we have to convert togetherness into really effective collaboration. And I think that can happen and already does happen, but it needs to happen more. You know, we see it just in our world, we see it within sectors sometimes. For example, the offshore wind accelerator that Carbon Trust has been instrumental in. We see it along supply chains. O2 talked today about how it's part of their targets to reduce their value chain emissions, and they have also got the Carbon Trust supply chain standard in the same area. And we also heard about circular economy, which is all about collaboration, whether it's really remanufacturing or product service systems or reuse. And so I think more of that has to happen, but it has to be
collaboration across industry, within industry.
Well, however it best happens. You know, we do a lot of work on climate leadership, and one of the hallmarks of a climate leader is their ability not just to be on the right trajectory themselves and to innovate for the transition, but actually also to advocate and to influence and to sometimes bring out technologies or other solutions which other people can use. So I think it is all about collaboration, but it has to be done within the framework, if you like, of net zero. And of course, organizations compete, but where they do compete, they need to be competing in the same direction.
And it's interesting because it's a theme that came up throughout the day, wasn't it? Collaboration, partnership, almost everyone touched on that. Exactly. So it's crucial. And would you say that we have momentum for that right now?
Well, judging by today, certainly. And I'd go a bit further and say we won't get to where we need to get to without, really, not just words, but really meaningful, effective collaboration. And I think in lots of settings, it's been shown that there is no disbenefit, if you like, in sharing in almost all cases.
Absolutely. And on that positive note, we'll leave it. Hugh, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sasha.
Thank you. Well, and that brings us to a close of the Carbon Trust Corporate Sustainability Summit. Thank you to Hugh and to all our speakers for joining us today. We're grateful for their participation and perspective. And thank you to you, our audience, for tuning in and for all your interaction and questions. Do follow the conversation with the Carbon Trust at the Carbon Trust, and all the videos will be available in the coming days. Thank you very much and stay well.